It's the most wonderful time of the year. If you've been around my corner of the internet for a while, you know that every year I do one special sale all on my own, not in conjunction with TBT site-wide sales or anything else. And that's my Cheer for the New Year sale. This is a week-long celebration, and it happens at the beginning of January every new year, and it is my biggest discounts I ever do in my store all year long. Each day, there will be a different deal that is good for 24 hours only, okay? That's right. It's 1 week long of deals with a different deal every single day. Now, here's the kicker. You need to be on my email list to participate because I only send these daily deals out to my email list. I do it every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern time. And so if you want a chance to snag It's Not Rocket Science resources at their lowest price all year long, you need to be sure that you are on my list so you do not miss these Cheer for the New Year specials. Okay, so you can join if you're not already at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/winter. And when you do, you will be given 4 free winter-themed high school science resources as a thank you for joining that you can use as you start this new semester. Okay, so that's itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/winter, and stay tuned for all the details coming to your inbox about Cheer for the New Year, the first full week of January. Happy New Year, teacher friends. I cannot believe that this is the start of the 4th year of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. And I'm excited because we are back to putting out new episodes, new content every single week, all year long. And if you have a science teacher friend, I would seriously love it if you would share the podcast with them. As of right now, this is the only podcast out there specifically for high school and middle school science teachers that consistently puts out new episodes every single week. And I'm so happy to serve y'all in this way. And I would just love to serve even more secondary science teachers in this new year. So if you can share the podcast, I would love it. Honestly, word of mouth is my favorite way to connect with new science teachers. So all of that to say, how do I want to kick off the new year with you? Well, I want to do it by equipping you with tips for what I like to do to kick off a new semester. So in this episode, I'm going to share specific tips for if you're starting your second semester with the same students this year, like you had a fall semester, now you're about to pick up with the spring. I'm going to share specific tips for those of you who are on a semester block and you're about to start a semester with brand new students. And then I'm going to end the episode with specific recommendations for what I would do the first day back in biology, chemistry, anatomy, and physical science. So without further ado, let's dive in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. First, I want to speak to those of you who are starting a second semester of the year with the same students. Maybe even you're on a trimester schedule or something like that, but I'm talking to those of you who are coming back from some sort of break or time off with the same students. You're picking back up with them. And so I have kind of, 4 tips for you. First, set the tone day 1. Okay, of what you want the rest of this school year to look like, okay? For me, that means we're back to business, okay? It doesn't mean we're like starting with a fluff day or a transition day. We are picking up exactly like we left off. We're starting with our prime time. You'll get 5 minutes to do it. It must be done in silence. We're going to go over it. Then we're going to jump into whatever new things we have. I highly recommend doing a prime time or a bell ringer. I just like to call them prime times because I think the first 5 minutes is the most important part of your class period. Do that your first day back. Get your students back in a rhythm of it. Even if you've never done a prime time and you want to start doing them, do it this first day, first thing, okay? And you can make it fun questions. I don't think your first day back should necessarily be review questions from the previous semester, unless that's something you really want to do, that's fine. It can be 5, fun questions, or 1 or 2 fun questions. Tell me one fun thing, you did over your time off, or I love that question. Tell me something good. Some of them may have had hard breaks. And so I think giving them an opportunity to look and find something good in that time off is a great opportunity. Or it could be, tell me something good, or tell me something you're excited about being back at school for, because that might be a way to reach those students that didn't have a great time off. So I just think starting with that prime time, getting them back in that rhythm is really important. So set the tone that we're back to business. We're going to run our classroom a certain way, and I'm going to pick up right where we left off doing that. Y'all know me. I'm a really big fan of doing everything like cold turkey and not like doing progressive, gradual changes. Like if you want to make a change, I recommend just starting with it and full force, 100% starting with the change. I don't think you need to inch them into changes. This is how I did like literally every single thing with my kids when they were babies, whether that was dropping the swaddle, dropping the passy, getting rid of bottles and formula. Like we just did cold turkey. I think it gives you a harder like first 3 days, but then after like 3 to 5 days, they've made the transition, as opposed to if you're like stretching it out and doing it gradually, it could take 2 to 4 weeks. So I'm a big fan of like hitting the ground running, making those big changes. Now, speaking of big changes, that leads me to my second tip. I highly recommend after your prime time, after you've gone over it, having like a 3 to 5 minute State of the Union address, if you will, or, a state of the classroom address. This is an opportunity, I think, for you to kind of share some things honestly with them. Say, hey, these were some things that I loved that we did together last semester. Reinforce some highlights, some positive things. We're going to continue doing that this semester. And then be honest about things that may have been hard last semester and the changes you're going to make now in this new semester to combat those things. Like, hey, I feel like there was a lot of pushback on class discussion and class participation. So I'm letting you know that I'm going to not be as tolerant of that this semester. I'm really going to lean in. I'm going to go through your names twice in a class period on my popsicle sticks. I expect you to speak during those times. If you have personal issues, we can address that after class. Or I felt like you guys had a lot of pushback on doing things yourself in this classroom. You really wanted me to take on the onus of all the learning, and that's not how it's going to be this semester. I'm really going to push you towards more autonomy, taking more ownership of your learning. Whatever it may be. I don't know what your most specific pain points were, but I think you address those. I also think in that we don't just highlight the ways that like they did poorly last semester, okay, and how you're going to like really stick it to them this semester. I think it's an opportunity for you as well to say, hey, here are some ways that I think I kind of failed you last semester, or I don't think I did a good job serving you last semester. And these are ways I'm going to do it differently this semester. So I just want you to be aware and like stack hands. We're making a hard shift here. Okay. So maybe one of those things is like, hey, hard shift. Like I was assigning homework and I wasn't doing a good job of grading it or holding you guys accountable, or I'm kind of feeling guilty that I was just giving y'all a lot of busy work. So new thing this semester is we're not going to do homework, and I'm going to expect more from you in class so that we don't have homework outside of class, or whatever that change may be. But I really want you to identify those weak points, do some reflection, see what was weak, see what was hard and challenging, and then let's address and introduce some new solutions here. Maybe you're going to introduce a prime time for the first time. You're going to start using popsicle sticks. You're going to start using packets because you're sick of the back and forth of the papers all day, every day. Okay, whatever it may be, this is such a good time to introduce it. I think a lot of people feel like you can't really make these big, classroom culture shifts mid-year, and I disagree entirely. I think the perfect time is coming back from a break and saying, okay, we're going to do things differently here. If you want to go back and learn more about like prime times, check out episode 4, popsicle sticks and some of my other hacks, episode 141, packets, that's episode 60. Maybe you want to grade differently this semester. You want to cut your grading time in half. Please give episode 120 a listen and let your students know, like, hey, I'm going to make serious changes about how I grade this semester so that 1, I have more capacity and energy to actually invest in you and engage with you, so I'm not grading outside of class. I'll have more capacity for tutoring, coming up with fun labs and activities, whatever that may be. Or maybe saying like, hey, I'm going to totally change how I grade this semester so that when I do collect and grade something, I can give it back to you the next day with feedback and you can really learn from it. So addressing those things, being honest about it, the pain points, but also offering the solutions, I think is going to be really, really helpful and it's going to serve your students. Now, let's say you're listening to this when this airs. You're listening to this on your way back to your first day of school and you're like, I haven't even had time to reflect or make any ideas about these changes or anything like that. Okay, that's okay. Don't throw your whole plan today to the wayside because you're listening to this and now you're stressed because you haven't had time to implement these changes. Hopefully some of you are listening to this and you're not going back until Wednesday of this week or something, so you have a little bit of time. But I will say this. Your semester is not lost. You might have coming up a long weekend. Our school calendar always has a long weekend in January. We get another long weekend in February. Make the shift after that. Come back the Tuesday after a long weekend and say, hey, we've kind of been getting into the new semester. We've been adjusting these last few weeks. I kind of took the long weekend and really thought about it. Now we're going to start fresh with something new at this point in the time. I think that's fine. I mean, you could pick any Monday and do this, guys. It could be the start of any new week. So don't use the excuse of oh, we've already started, I can't try something new. It is easier if you have a natural transition, after a break to start something new, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. So I really recommend doing that. So we're going to set the tone. We're going to have a state of the classroom address. My third thing is going to be to encourage you is to say, hold the line. Whatever it is you decide to do, whatever changes you have decided to make, please hold the line on them. We have to clearly communicate our expectations to our students. We have to consistently reinforce those expectations to our students. And then we have to hold the line. And if we said there's going to be some sort of recourse or, natural consequence to not doing these things and upholding the expectations, then we have to do those. Okay, so hold the line there so that your word actually means something. If you say, hey, we're going to do this differently this year, and then you don't reinforce that, you don't hold the line, you don't have any sort of consequence for that, then they're not going to actually listen to anything you say because your word doesn't mean anything. So really hold the line on those things. And then my last recommendation is dive into learning new stuff second semester. If you have the same students, you don't need some sort of buffer day. I think sometimes we think oh, we got to ease them back in. I don't think that at all. They know you, they know your routines, they know your rhythms, they know how your classroom runs. You don't need another day going over the syllabus. I think you give it that 3 to 5 minutes for the state of the classroom address. You answer any questions they have, and then you dive right in. Now, I do recommend trying to have something fun, and I'll share some recommendations at the end of this episode. But I don't think it's the end of the world if you're diving in means we're diving back into notes. That's not my first choice, but I know sometimes that just has to happen because you're starting something totally new. But I recommend really giving them something, if you can, that's a little bit more autonomous. We want to reawaken those muscles that may have atrophied overnight to say, hey, remember, in this class, this isn't just a sit and get situation. You can't just sit there and just absorb information and then walk out and be a robot here. You have to engage in this class. You have to do stuff. So that's what I highly recommend. Dive in and really dive in with them doing something. It doesn't have to be this super hands-on lab. It could be an inquiry activity. It could be a review stations if you want to do that, but something where you're not up front just delivering information for the whole time if you can avoid it. Because again, if you've already had the prime time, you've already done your state of the classroom address, you've already been up front a good bit at the front of the class period. Let's kind of change things for the rest of the class period and really get them engaged in remembering, oh yeah, we do a lot of stuff here. We're very productive in this class, okay? That's what I want to encourage you to do as you start off your second semester. Now, a few specific tips for those of you, on a semester block. You're starting a new semester with brand new students. First, let me say this is my favorite teaching schedule, if I'm honest. One, because I love the fresh start with students. Two, because it really gives me so much more time to experiment with what I'm doing in my classroom. Because let's say I try, grading less and cutting my grading time in half and I totally change up how much I'm grading. Well, let's say it didn't go as great first semester, fresh start. Or, maybe there are some labs or there's a way I taught things, the first go around that didn't go so well. I get a fresh start second semester. The school I taught at, my first 2 years in the classroom was semester block. So even though I was there for 2 years, it felt like 4 years because I got to start and finish going through an entire outline, curriculum, pacing guide sequence for a class. I had to do that 4 times. So I felt like it truly gave me double the experience, which I really, really loved. So if that is you on semester block, I really want to encourage you, even more than other teachers, to reflect on the last semester and what went well and what didn't, and take advantage of this fresh start opportunity you have to change things up. Now, maybe too, you're listening and you're like, I'm actually stepping in mid-year and I feel very overwhelmed practically for how to do this job. I definitely recommend, if that's the case, you check out, I have virtual professional development for secondary science teachers. You can check it out at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/PD. But this will give you some really, really practical tools for how to step into this role. I personally recommend, even though I have each of the little units as mini courses a la carte, I recommend getting the bundle of Secondary Science Simplified. It's a comprehensive course of all these mini units, these mini courses. You start with like really reflecting on your core values and what you want your classroom to look like. We move into relationships, culture, lessons, labs, assessments, work-life balance. Like we cover it all. Highly recommend for those of you new teachers. Now, last thing I'll say for semester block teachers, go give episode 141 a listen. This was one I did back in August for first day of school and tips for your first units. So if you're starting fresh with students, like that all applies to you. So go back and give episode 141 a listen if this is your first day with brand new students. Okay, now let's talk specific content recommendations because I've gotten some feedback that y'all really enjoy that. So I want to make sure that we're doing that. So I'm going to specifically talk about, my content areas, my strengths, which are biology, chemistry, anatomy, and physical science. Now, first I have to say though, like the tricky part with this is my recommendations will really vary depending on where you are in your sequence. I know a lot of us teach in different orders or totally different paces, or like if you started in September, maybe you're not even technically finishing up your first semester with students until middle of January, and then you start, your second semester. So this can get really tricky based on where you are. If you want to know what my sequences are, what my scope and sequences are, my pacing guides, I have those available for free for all my content areas. It's basically like itsnotrocketscience.com/the subject and then guide. So /bio-guide, /chemistry guide, /anatomy-guide. Like I'll have all of those linked in my show notes. You can click and grab those and you can see exactly how long I attempt to spend on each unit in each of my curricula, and also like the order of them and what I'm covering. So highly recommend those so you have context. But let's just dive into each one of these for recommendations. So biology, typically I was finishing genetics at the end of first semester. And then when we came back in January, we were picking up with heredity. So you might be thinking, what's the difference between genetics and heredity? In genetics, we're really looking more micro at the genes. I would cover DNA structure, replication. We talk about protein synthesis, and we talk about meiosis. That's where we ended the semester. In heredity, we're picking back up and we're building on a lot of those topics, but we're looking more at the inheritance patterns. We're doing Punnett squares. We're looking at complex inheritance patterns. We're talking about mutations and pedigrees and tracking, these traits, these inheritance patterns throughout families. Okay, so that's where we're picking up. One of the things I love to do, and this is not a resource I have, but you can Google it. There's like so many different free versions of this, is Google like create a baby face lab. This is like a really simple lab. A ton of people have different free derivations of it, but essentially you're giving them coins and we're looking at either or traits here, which you and I both know is a lot more complicated than that, genetics are, but it's like a fun way to start off the year and really do something. But essentially they're going to be with a partner and they're each going to flip a coin. And they're typically these labs come with a chart. And so you don't even really need to understand dominance, recessiveness, like any of that to do this. But like if they get 2 heads, then their child's going to have, a unibrow. If they get a heads and a tail, it'll have a unibrow. If they get tails, they get separated eyebrows. And so your students will flip coins and they will figure out these different traits together of what the baby that they would make together would create. And then they get to draw the baby's face. And it's really funny. Oftentimes these turn out super ugly. The kids think it's hysterical. And then you can make a bulletin board like this is our class nursery and hang up all their faces. And then this is a great lab too. Again, it's one of those where they really don't need to like understand a lot about it to do it, but they can start seeing how like there's dominance, there's recessiveness. They can see the randomness with the flip of the coin, which I think is really important because we don't know what assortment of our genes will go into the egg or sperm. And then it's just, again, it's a fun way to get them seeing the probability. We're just starting to introduce these ideas, but it's fun, it's productive, and it's autonomous. They can really do a lot of this on their own. So that's how I recommend starting in biology if you're in the middle of genetics and heredity and that kind of thing, where I typically fell. I also like it too because if you've already done genetics, they have some familiarity with a lot of these terms, even though we haven't gotten into alleles and again, homozygous, heterozygous, any of that yet. It's a nice little intro version. Again, these are free all over Google. You can find one too and kind of even just take the chart from it and then make your own version. I definitely recommend. It's a fun one. Okay, so for chemistry, I want to speak to you next. Typically, I would have finished like chemical reactions, like balancing and classifying and all of that pre-break. And I'm coming back in January for stoichiometry. So I highly, 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 highly recommend picking up the new year with chemistry and reviewing scientific notation and dimensional analysis before diving into stoic. I am a huge fan of teaching dimensional analysis and scientific notation at the beginning of the year in chemistry. I like to have like an introduction to chemistry unit that I start the year off where we cover like a lot of basic things. Some people call this their unit 0 that they do. I think it's so important to introduce at the beginning of the year so that when you bring it up again in stoic, it's not the first time they've seen it. And the first time they're seeing these things, they're seeing it with units that they might be more familiar with, like tablespoons and cups and things they might have used in the kitchen, as opposed to just diving in with talking about like moles and grams. Like that feels a lot more foreign to them. So I think it's so important to introduce this at the beginning of the year. Now let's bring it back again. Let's review it again before we dive into these skills within the context of doing stoichiometry. And so the very first resource I recommend that's in my stoichiometry unit, but it's also available for free, and I'll tell you how to get it, is my homemade hot chocolate lab activity. So in physical science and in the beginning of the year in chemistry, we do this with fudge. It's the same activity we've done then, but it's revamped and repurposed. And you're going to make hot chocolate, hopefully because it's mid-year. If you live kind of where I live, it's a little bit colder. So it's a fun version of a similar thing. And then there are extensions to it that make it a little bit more advanced than the first time we did it. If you're like, my kids don't want to do it twice. My students love doing a version of this twice because again, it's a totally different result. You're getting use out of those metal cups that you invested in for the fudge lab. You're getting more use out of them. I highly recommend. So if you haven't grabbed already, I have some freebies for winter science activities. There's 4 in the PDF. So when you get it, it's like a PDF and it has a free winter science activity for biology, chemistry, physics, and anatomy. And this homemade hot chocolate is the freebie for the chemistry one. So I highly recommend downloading this. It's the same that's in my stoichiometry unit. So try this out. I think it's such a good way to introduce it. And then day 2, you can introduce your actual stoic unit and really start getting into like, okay, now that we've had a refresher on some of these skills, now let's dive into really applying it from a chemistry standpoint. Okay, now let's talk about anatomy. I know this is getting a little long. Anatomy and physical science really quickly. Anatomy is an interesting one because I feel like the body systems are all so intertwined in how they work together to maintain homeostasis. But at the same time, they do also very much stand alone. So I don't know if it really necessarily matters like where you're ending the semester in anatomy and where you're picking up again. For me personally, we would have finished the first semester with control and coordination unit, which is my nervous system, senses, endocrine system unit. And then we'd be picking back up with my transport unit, which is like blood, cardiovascular, respiratory. But again, I don't think that really matters as much. Here's my recommendation, what I would do at the start of your second semester in anatomy. It's the same thing that I recommended doing day 1 of the school year in anatomy. I think you do it again and you do round 2 at the beginning of the second semester so that then at the end of the year, when you do the third and final round, you can compare and see the evolution of their understanding in this. So here's the activity. You get huge pieces of butcher block paper from your art teacher, okay? You pre-cut them so they're like life size, okay? So you need like 6 foot like reams of this, okay, for each group. You put your students in groups of 3 to 4. You trace an outline of one of the group members on the paper. Then you're going to put a list on your whiteboard or project a list, with your projector of 10 to 15 organs. And you want them to have to use their prior knowledge they have of the body and figure out where these go on the outline of the person on the ground, okay? Now, you can make a PowerPoint slide that has clip art of the organs so they know how to draw their general shape if you want. You also can just let them totally guess from scratch. It's completely up to you. But I think this is so much fun because at the beginning of the year, they most likely had no prior context and were putting things in crazy locations and crazy sizes, which I always love seeing to scale, like how big they're making like the stomach versus the brain or whatever. But then this is fun to do now mid-year because you've now covered a few body systems. So hopefully they're getting a little bit better at this. And then I recommend taking these and stapling them to the back of what they did the first day of school, rolling them up. Don't let them see yet. And then again, I love doing this again one more time at the end of the year to review for final exams and then comparing all of them. It's so fun for them. They will laugh so hard to see where they were putting certain organs now that they know where things actually go. So this is a really fun way. Again, it's getting them autonomous. It's getting them really doing stuff, but it's still productive. It's still fun. We're still really diving into content here. Now, if you are teaching transport, if you're picking back up with the cardiovascular system or something mid-year, I think a really great kind of just inquiry activity you can do before diving into lecture notes is figuring out what do they know about blood. Okay, so just doing a little thing, putting them in pairs, putting them in groups of 3 to 4, just asking them a few questions and seeing what they say. So asking them, okay, what is the point of blood in the body? How does blood work? What's a vein? What's an artery? Why is blood pictured blue sometimes and red other times in textbooks? What do you know about blood type and how that works? I think asking some of these questions, it's really revealing of their prior knowledge. It's also hilarious and some of the things that they will say. But this is a great way to get them thinking, them engaging. I personally recommend having them start in pairs, talking through these questions or even on their own, then pairing them up, then putting 2 pairs together to be groups of 4, having them come up with their ideas, then have them write like a final sheet of their answers to these questions, save them, then y'all pull these back out on your review day for this unit and have them see what they said and have them correct their own misunderstandings of their previous answers. It is such a fun activity to do. So simple, like barely any prep. Again, we'll get them really hands-on. And then if you need to dive into lecture notes because you're starting something totally new, you can do that because they've already had a chance to be autonomous at the beginning of class. And then last but not least, physical science. My goal was always personally to get through all of the physics units in the first semester so that I could start fresh with chemistry and start with my matter unit. If that is the case, I love starting with exploring matter, doing the classification and properties of matter stations if you can. I'll link those in the show notes because I have those like available a la carte, separate from the matter unit. I love that. But if I'm perfectly honest with y'all, I never got through all the physics stuff first semester. Typically, waves got pushed to second semester. So if you're starting with waves, I recommend doing something similar to what I just mentioned about blood for anatomy, asking them some questions about waves. Like, what are waves? What are different types of waves you know about? Showing them pictures like of a sound wave, or what's an electromagnetic wave? What do you know about electromagnetic radiation? Just starting to engage them and get some prior knowledge. They will put some wild stuff down, y'all, but it's a great way just to kind of pull them and kind of see where they're at before you dive in. I also plan to add, if you don't know this, my goal for this year is I'm doing a revamp of the physical science curriculum. It's my oldest curriculum that hasn't had a major revamp. Biology was technically first, but then I revamped it 4 years after I wrote it. Physical science, I wrote second in 2017, and I have not revamped it. So that is like my major goal this year that I'm focusing on. I plan to add an inquiry activity into this waves unit that you'll be able to start the year off with, or the semester off with, but that's going to be a ways because I'm working through these one by one. But stay tuned for that. If you own the physical science curriculum or any of the units, any of my stuff, I do free updates for life. So stay tuned for that. That will come Waves will probably be this summer because I'm still working on Unit 1, but stay tuned for that. Okay, I hope this gave you some ideas and some tips to kick off the new semester strong. These are my top tips, and I really hope that they equip you. And if they did, would you leave a review today? And also, would you share the podcast with a teacher friend? It would mean so much to me. And I know I mentioned a lot of freebies, a lot of things you can grab and use in your classroom. Those are all linked in my show notes. They're so easy to find. You just go to my website, itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/whatever the episode is. So /episode 164 for this episode, and you can grab all of those. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.